The soft golden light of early morning spilled through the massive windows of the Cole estate, stretching across marble floors and illuminating the quiet halls of a mansion that had once been filled with warmth. Now, it echoed with the coldness of unspoken truths and forgotten affections. At the center of it all stood Alexander Cole, a man whose billions shaped cities, whose name commanded boardrooms, and whose signature altered global markets. Yet in the stillness of that morning, he looked less like a titan of wealth and more like a tired old man staring into the reflection of a life that no longer felt like his own. He paused at the edge of the hallway leading to the dining room, listening. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind that reminded him he lived in a house too large for one heart. Alexander moved slowly, a cane tapping softly beside him, not because he needed it, but because shadows of age had begun settling in his bones. His reflection on the polished floor seemed older than he remembered. Hair thinning, shoulders slightly curved, eyes dimmed by years of watching people draw close only when they wanted something from him. The loneliness had not come suddenly. It crept in gradually, like a crack in glass spreading until the entire pane is weak. He thought about his 3 children, Richard, the calculating eldest, Naomi, the glamorous second-born, and Lucas, the carefree youngest. Once they had run through these halls laughing, chasing each other, begging for bedtime stories. Now they barely visited unless a business expansion, a loan, or an investment opportunity was involved. Alexander sighed. He had everything a man could possibly want, except someone who cared without an agenda. As he walked toward the study, his late wife's portrait caught his eye. Rebecca had been the only person who loved him purely, and when cancer stole her away, it had also stolen the glue that held the family together. He stopped in front of the portrait, tracing her gentle smile with his eyes. "If you were here," he whispered under his breath, "would things be different? Or did I fail them after all?" The portrait, timeless and silent, offered no comfort. Alexander lowered himself into the large leather chair in his study. Papers, financial reports, estate documents, they surrounded him in neat piles. On the desk, a medical report sat untouched, delivered by Dr. Mensah 2 days earlier. His health was stable for a man his age, but his heart, his emotional heart, felt unsteady. His fingers brushed the report, but he pulled back. It wasn't physical health he worried about. It was the question gnawing at him, refusing to let him rest. If he died today, who in his family would truly mourn him? Not the money, not the inheritance, but him? Minutes passed. His mind churned. The weight of years settled on his shoulders. And then slowly an idea surfaced. A dangerous one, but one that pulled him with irresistible force. He lifted the phone and dialed Dr. Mensah. The doctor arrived within the hour, briefcase in hand, wearing the calm, disciplined expression of a man who had weathered many storms beside the Cole family. Alexander watched him approach the desk, feeling an echo of shame in what he was about to request. "Mensah," Alexander began, voice low, "I need your help." The doctor sat down, sensing the gravity in his tone. "What troubles you?" Alexander clasped his hands together tightly. "I want you to tell my children that my health is failing." Dr. Mensah blinked. "Failing? On what basis?" "No real basis," Alexander admitted. "But I want them to believe it." The doctor's face stiffened, his calm replaced by contained shock. "Sir, you're asking me to lie to your family?" "Yes." Alexander's voice cracked. "Because I need to know something. I need to know who they are without the promise of wealth. I need to know whether they care for me, or for what I provide." Dr. Mensah leaned back slowly. The weight of the request settled heavily between them. "This could damage your relationship with them," the doctor warned quietly. "Perhaps permanently." Alexander closed his eyes. If the relationship can be broken by truth, then maybe it wasn't a relationship at all. The doctor studied him for a long moment before speaking. "What exactly do you want me to tell them?" "That I'm weak, that I need rest, that I might not have long if I don't take care of myself." Alexander exhaled. "Nothing too dramatic. Just enough for concern, if there is any." Dr. Mensah hesitated, wrestling with the ethics, the risks, and the silent desperation in Alexander's eyes. After a long pause, he nodded softly. "I'll do it. But this test, it must be temporary." Alexander offered a faint smile, one of relief mixed with fear. "Temporary is all I need." By evening, messages had been sent. A family meeting was summoned. The kind of meeting his children would never ignore, not when something concerning the patriarch's health was the subject. The next day, luxury cars lined the family driveway. Richard arrived first. He walked in briskly, dressed in a tailored navy suit, phone in hand, thumb tapping rapidly on the screen. He didn't even glance at the staff as he passed. "Where is he?" Richard demanded. "Let's make this quick. I have a board presentation in an hour." Naomi entered moments later, the click of her heels echoing through the marble foyer. She looked radiant, glamorous, irritated. "Daddy could have at least warned us," she complained to no one in particular. "I had an important spa session today. Now everything is ruined." And then Lucas appeared last, sunglasses on indoors, smelling faintly of yesterday's nightlife. "Is he dying or something?" he asked casually, handing his jacket to a butler without looking. The three siblings gathered around the long dining table, not speaking to each other. Each wore a mask: impatience, annoyance, mild concern only because concern sounded appropriate. Alexander entered soon after, slower than usual, leaning more heavily on his cane, playing the role with painful accuracy. He watched his children's eyes flicker not with worry but with appraisal. Dr. Mensah began. "Your father has been diagnosed with a condition that requires immediate rest and lifestyle adjustment," he said gently. "If he doesn't take it seriously, the situation could worsen." The room stilled. Richard's eyes sharpened before anyone else's. Naomi's lips parted, not in grief but in calculation. Lucas sat up straighter, absorbing the implications like alcohol. None of them asked what the condition was. None asked how Alexander felt. None reached for his hand. Their first instinct was business. "So," Richard began slowly, "should we discuss restructuring responsibilities?" Naomi added, "We need to know what happens if things get worse, Daddy. For planning purposes." Lucas leaned back. "Who gets what if, you know?" The question drifted into the air like poison. And Alexander felt the last piece of his heart fracture. This was not concern. This was strategy. This was greed hiding behind polite expressions. The test had only begun, but already he knew the truth. Later that night, Alexander watched his security footage alone in the study. His children walked through the mansion with the same detachment one might use when touring a museum, touching things not out of affection but ownership. He whispered to himself, "Rebecca, what happened to our babies?" No one answered. And the house, large and cold, seemed to agree with him. The following week unfolded like a slow-burning tragedy inside the Cole estate. The mansion, usually quiet but dignified, now buzzed with an unsettling energy, the kind that appears when vultures begin circling. Alexander observed his children carefully, each day revealing another layer of their true intentions. Richard was the first to shift. He took it upon himself to manage the estate during his father's supposed decline, scheduling private meetings with lawyers and financial advisors in the guest lounge. He spoke with authority, signing documents he had no right to sign, introducing himself as the acting head of the Cole Empire. In one recorded conversation, he leaned toward a young estate attorney and said calmly, "My father isn't thinking clearly these days. We may need to reassess the distribution of shares before things deteriorate." The lawyer hesitated. "But Mr. Cole hasn't relinquished." "He will," Richard interrupted. "It's just a matter of time." He said it casually, almost impatiently, as if waiting for a delayed flight rather than planning around a man's mortality. Alexander watched the footage later with trembling hands. Every word sliced deeper than any illness possibly could. Naomi's transformation, however, was more theatrical. She began taking long dramatic walks through the mansion, inspecting items as if cataloging her future inheritance. She lingered over jewelry cases, art pieces, designer antiques, all with the slow hunger of someone imagining her life after a great windfall. She also hosted a family portrait session, inviting a professional photographer without consulting her father. "This is important for our legacy," she insisted loudly, arranging the staff like props. "One must preserve family history before things change." She wore black to the session. "A symbolic color," she told the confused makeup artist. "Just in case." Alexander saw the pictures later. Naomi smiling like a queen awaiting coronation, her siblings standing stiffly beside her. The space reserved for him, empty. Lucas, on the other hand, turned the mansion into a playground. He invited friends over nightly, throwing casual parties under the guise of keeping the old place lively. Expensive bottles vanished from the cellar. Exotic cars disappeared from the garage on spontaneous joyrides. In one outrageous moment caught on camera, Lucas stood beside the pool at midnight, raising a glass. To the future. The very near future. Laughter erupted around him. Alexander watched the footage in silence. He had prepared himself for disappointment. But nothing prepared him for the cold ambition in his children's eyes. Amid the noise of betrayal, there was one figure in the house whose presence brought a fragile warmth. Maya, the young housemaid. Unlike the others, she knocked softly before entering Alexander's room each morning. She brought fresh tea, folded blankets, and moved quietly so as not to disturb him. But it wasn't her duties that comforted him, it was her sincerity. One afternoon she found him staring at the garden through the window, pain etched into every line of his face. "Sir, you haven't eaten," she said gently. He didn't respond. His chest tightened, his mind replaying the footage of his children fighting over his will. Maya stepped closer. "Are you feeling worse today?" Alexander's voice was hollow. "I'm feeling exactly as I should." She didn't understand, but she sensed the depth of his grief. Maya rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture so simple, yet more comforting than anything he had felt in years. "If there's anything you need," she whispered, "anything at all, I'm here." For a moment he closed his eyes, absorbing the rare kindness. In that single moment, Maya felt more like family than his own blood. By the 9th day, something happened that Alexander had secretly feared. His children gathered in the study, the very room where he once read them bedtime stories, to discuss his will. Their voices rose through the walls, their words echoed down the hall like a verdict. Richard paced with a folder in hand. "He's still competent enough to keep the will as it is. If we don't intervene now, we risk losing everything." Naomi crossed her arms. "So what do you suggest? We force him to sign something?" Lucas leaned against the desk with a smirk. "That's one option." Naomi gasped faintly but didn't argue. "You mean, while he's weak?" "He's old," Lucas shrugged. "His memory slips. His judgment slips. If we push the narrative right, we can have him declared mentally unfit. It happens more often than you think." Richard didn't even flinch. "We must get ahead of this. Father has an unpredictable streak. He could change everything overnight." Naomi looked between her brothers. Her voice trembled only slightly. "If we do this, we're removing his rights." Richard snapped sharply, "Before he removes ours." Outside the study door, Alexander stood frozen, having arrived moments earlier intending to join them. But now he felt the world tilt beneath him. Their voices cut him down with surgical precision, stripping him of dignity, humanity, and fatherhood all at once. His cane slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud crack. Inside the voices dropped. "Did you hear that?" Lucas whispered. But Alexander was already walking away, or stumbling away, heart pounding with a mixture of heartbreak, humiliation, and fury he could barely contain. That night, he sat alone in the dark, refusing food, refusing comfort, refusing even the company of his thoughts. Betrayal felt suffocating. It lived in his throat, in his chest, in the trembling of his hands. Rebecca's portrait stared down at him from across the room. The softness in her eyes made his collapse feel even harsher. "I failed them," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Or they failed me." A single tear fell. Then another. Until the dam broke. The next morning, Alexander summoned Dr. Mensah to the mansion. When the doctor arrived, Alexander's jaw was tight, his voice cold with controlled determination. "End it," he said. Dr. Mensah frowned. "End what?" "The test," Alexander replied sharply. "I can't watch this any longer." The doctor took a seat. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" Alexander nodded slowly. "Whatever the consequences, they are mine to face." Mensah studied him quietly, then spoke with gentle firmness. "The truth has come out, Alexander. And truth, once revealed, does not return to silence." Alexander inhaled deeply. "Let them face it then." He ordered all his children to return to the mansion that evening. The message was simple. Family meeting. Mandatory. They arrived with mixed emotions, irritation, worry, and curiosity. The atmosphere was charged, electric, thick with unspoken tension. Richard stepped forward. "Father, what's the urgency? Are you?" But Alexander lifted a hand sharply, silencing him. "Inside," he said. They followed him into the grand hall, a towering room with high ceilings and a wall-sized screen at one end. Naomi frowned. "Why are we here?" Alexander didn't answer. He walked to the center of the room and stood tall, straight, strong, without the cane he had relied on for days. His children stared in confusion. "Father," Richard began again, "are you feeling better?" Alexander met his eyes with a coldness none of them had ever seen. "I was never sick." The words fell like a bomb. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Lucas blinked stupidly. Richard froze entirely. Before they could speak, Alexander pressed a button on a small remote. The giant screen behind him lit up, showing recorded footage from the past week. Footage of them arguing over the will. Footage of Lucas boasting. Footage of Naomi planning her symbolic photo shoot. Footage of Richard meeting with lawyers to seize control. The siblings watched, faces draining of color, as their own words condemned them. "You plan to declare me mentally unfit," Alexander said quietly. "You discussed my assets as if I were already dead. You celebrated my supposed decline." Richard swallowed, throat tight. "Father, this is taken out of context." "No," Alexander cut him sharply. "This is the exact context. The only context that matters." Naomi stepped forward, voice trembling. "Daddy, we didn't mean." "You meant every word," Alexander replied. "And you showed me exactly who you are." He paused. "And now, I will show you who I am." A suffocating silence filled the grand hall. The screen behind Alexander went dark, but the weight of what it had shown lingered like smoke. His 3 children stood frozen, their expressions shifting between shock, shame, anger, and fear. Fear not of losing their father, but of losing what they believed they were entitled to. Alexander stepped forward. His presence, though aged, radiated the controlled power of a man who had rebuilt empires after storms. His voice cut through the air, quiet yet lethal. "For years," he began, "I believed love could be bought with comfort. That if I gave you the world, you would give me your hearts in return." His gaze moved from Richard to Naomi to Lucas. "I was wrong." Richard opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Alexander raised his hand, commanding silence. "Each of you failed this test in ways I never imagined possible." He turned to Richard first. "You, my eldest, the one who once cried on my shoulder after scraping his knee. The one I groomed to become a leader." Alexander's voice hardened. "You planned to take control of my companies before I was even gone. You spoke to lawyers about my declining judgment, as if my life were an obstacle to your ambition." Richard's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Alexander stepped toward Naomi. "And you, Naomi, my beautiful, charismatic daughter. You turned my illness into a photo shoot, a spectacle. You imagined yourself the future matriarch of this estate as if the role were a fashion accessory." Naomi's eyes reddened. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she said nothing. Finally, Alexander faced Lucas. "And you?" His tone dropped, colder than before. "The one who cared for nothing but pleasure. You treated my home like a celebration venue. You toasted to my very near future, while I listened." Lucas looked away, ashamed but defensive. "Dad, we didn't know. We thought." "You thought I was dying," Alexander finished. "And what you did with that thought revealed who you are." He turned his back to them, moving toward a table where a single folder lay. He placed a hand on it. "I called you here to tell you what comes next." The siblings exchanged nervous glances. Alexander opened the folder. "My will has been rewritten. Effective immediately." Naomi gasped softly. Richard's breath quickened. Lucas straightened as though bracing for impact. Alexander continued, unshaken. "My assets, every company, every estate, every share, every account, have been restructured. My legacy is no longer in your hands. I am giving 1/3 of my wealth to charity, 1/3 to humanitarian foundations, and the final portion." He paused deliberately. "Will go to the person who has shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than my own children have shown in 20 years. All 3 siblings stiffened. Alexander looked toward the side of the room. Standing quietly near the door was Maya. Her eyes widened with shock as Alexander spoke her name. "Maya has cared for me without expectation," he said. "She has treated me like a father, not a bank. She is the only person in this house who saw me as a man, not a fortune." Maya shook her head gently, overwhelmed. "Sir, I never expected." "I know," Alexander replied softly. "That is why you deserve it." The siblings erupted. Richard stepped forward angrily. "A housemaid? Father, have you lost your mind?" Naomi burst into tears. "Daddy, please, we can change, we didn't mean." Lucas pointed at Maya accusingly. "She manipulated you. She wants the money." Alexander spun around so sharply that Lucas flinched. "Do not insult the only genuine soul among us," he said, voice rising with a force that echoed across the hall. "You insult yourselves by comparison." Richard clenched his fists. "You can't disinherit us like this. We're your family." Alexander stared him down, eyes cold. "Family is not determined by blood," he said. "Family is determined by love. And you have shown me none." Naomi stepped closer, tears streaming. Please, we didn't know you heard us. And that, Alexander replied, is precisely the problem. You spoke freely because you loved my wealth, not my existence. Concern was a performance, affection was strategy. Lucas tried another angle. Dad, you lied too. You pretended to be sick. Alexander's expression softened into a sadness deeper than anger. And your reactions exposed everything I feared. The siblings fell silent again. A heavy, heartbreaking quiet swallowed the room. Alexander turned to Maya. You may leave for now, he told her gently. We'll discuss the details later. Maya bowed her head and exited, visibly shaken, confused, grateful, and worried all at once. Once she was gone, Alexander faced his children for the last time. I love you, he said softly. Perhaps more than you deserve. But love does not mean blindness. I am old enough now to choose peace. He walked to the large doors at the end of the hall. None of you are banned from my life, he said. But from today onward you will not live off me. You will not inherit by default. If you want a relationship with me, it must be built on sincerity, not expectation. Richard's voice cracked. So we're starting from nothing? You're starting from yourselves, Alexander replied. That is more than enough, if you allow it to be. He signaled to the guards. Escort them out. Naomi sobbed as she was led toward the doors. Lucas cursed under his breath. Richard stared at his father, not with hate but with stunned realization, before turning away. The doors closed behind them. For the first time in decades the house felt quiet. Not empty. Not cold. Just calm. Over the next months the mansion changed. Flowers bloomed in the gardens again. Laughter returned, not from lavish parties but from simple conversations. Maya remained at Alexander's side, not as a servant, but as a trusted companion. Under his guidance, she used her inheritance to establish community centers, educational programs, and orphanage projects. Each one bore the name Rebecca's Haven, honoring Alexander's late wife. The billionaire who once feared dying alone now spent his days surrounded by the people he had chosen, not the people who had used him. And his children. Richard visited first. Months later, quietly, humbly. He apologized without excuses. Naomi came next, not in designer clothes but in simple attire, asking if she could understand him better. Lucas arrived last, broken by his own reckless lifestyle, asking for a second chance. Alexander accepted their apologies. But he never restored their inheritance. They would rebuild their bonds, yes. But they would not rebuild entitlement. He had given them something more valuable than wealth. A truth that forced them to confront themselves. Years later, on the anniversary of the day he revealed the truth, Alexander wrote a final letter, a reflection to be read after his passing. It ended with a single line. Those who love for gain will leave when the gain is gone. Those who love for truth will stay even when everything else falls apart. Alexander Cole died peacefully, surrounded not by wealth, but by love. A love he found not in the family he created, but in the humanity he rediscovered. And that was his legacy.